But Carol, she does have some things she can boast about. The small business success. She claims a record of 19 million small business applications were received under their leadership. And that's a record, I hear. That's what they say.
Okay, so this is, I think most people know who listen to me on your program that I'm one of the world's leading experts on small business. Yeah. I've been entrenched for decades. Mm-hmm. I heard this small business applications, and I went around to every group that I know, and I said, what is a small business application? Because when I started my business, I didn't have to apply at the federal level. Certainly if I had an LLC, so I registered that with the state. Some people have sole proprietorships. What does this mean? Because we have 33 plus million small businesses, but that only grows on net less than 1 million a year. So how is it possible that we have 19 million new application starts? And so far, no one's really been able to give me an answer. I have one committee, related to the House Small Business Committee, who thinks that maybe there's some information that came from the state census data. But I asked them; they're actually having a committee hearing, and I asked them if they could ask the SBA administrator and put her on the hot seat, because they're running around touting these made-up statistics to sound like there's some champion of small business. At the same time, Glenn, NFIB came out with their small business optimism index today. The 32nd consecutive month that small business optimism has been below the historical average, and that's a 50-year average.
Well, that's because they fear Donald Trump is coming back.
For 32 months, yes.
I mean, it's crazy because I see this number, of 19 million small businesses, and I'm like, I thought that was just because of all the businesses that they had put out of business. They're like starting up new businesses. So I just thought they were taking credit like they do with all the job creation. We've created more jobs. No, you didn't. People went back to work. You had told them you cannot work. So, of course, there were people going back to work. But you're saying this isn't that at all. This is possibly even made up.
I mean, it's something, but nobody knows really what it means. It certainly is not it's not a proxy for new small businesses created, which is what they're intimating. And we know the number of small businesses, a year ago was 32 point something million, and then it climbed to 33 point something million. Yes, that's on net, unless they're killing 18 million small businesses a year, which, we know that they're certainly trying, but I don't think that they've succeeded in doing that yet. That this is a absolute, it's just, spouting off nonsense. And they're doing this, again and again to gaslight people into things are so great. We're so in your corner. But at the same time, she's coming out and she's tweeting about anti-small business policies like the PRO Act that she said that she's going to put in place, which for people who don't know, that is the anti-gig worker and anti-independent contractor language from California's AB 5 taken nationally. And they want to kill the gig economy and all of the small businesses that depend on independent contractors in favor of unions and big business. So it's very difficult to say, I am the small business, I am the worker candidate, and still be in favor of these things, which is why I equate it to being like McDonald's being pro-cows.
It is, as a small business owner myself, I look at tomorrow and think if they get in, the regulations, just the regulations alone that are still sitting out there that they want to impose, will just crush small businesses. These guys, they used to say that, the Republicans are in with big business. Well, they were also in with small business, too. They had a business attitude. These guys are only big business. They are only in with the giant global corporations. That's all they care about. And it is honestly like they are trying to impoverish the small business and impoverish the middle class without moving any of the middle class up. They're moving them all down.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up regulations because, as I mentioned, there's this House committee meeting right now, and they came out with a report earlier this year that the Biden-Harris agenda imposed $1.7 trillion in regulations on small businesses, and that was before we've had some of these pending regulations go into place. So I am certain that that's higher, and that is millions upon millions of hours that are wasted. That is real dollars that are wasted, and that's a barrier to success. You know, we keep hearing this ridiculous phrase, the opportunity economy. Well, if you want to create opportunity, you reduce barriers, or you reduce regulations, you reduce taxes, you reduce the government being up in your business, and you have the government mind their own business so that you can go off and work in your business.
You know,
that is what it is all about.
I know that our audience is heavy on entrepreneurs and people who have done business for a long time, but there's also a younger generation that listens. And explain why regulations hurt opportunity.
They hurt opportunity because, number one, they're costly. Two, you're spending time complying with the regulation instead of spending the time working and growing your business. And the challenge is that if you are a big company, if you're the Amazons of the world, if you're the Walmarts of the world, you have not only a whole balance sheet to deal with this, but you have a whole host of people in your company, whether it's HR or whether it's some other administrative function that can deal with these regulations. When it comes to small business, the greater majority of small businesses, it's just the entrepreneur. So it's one person who's already wearing all of those hats trying to deal with this. Even if you have some employees, you don't have the wherewithal, the ability, you're struggling enough to deal with inflation, finding the right workers, remaining competitive, dealing with cybersecurity and the like. You don't have time and you don't have bandwidth and you don't have capital to deal with these regulations. And some of them are so onerous that people want to close their business, something that we've been talking about, Glenn, for months now, that the Corporate Transparency Act, which is this registration with the Financial Crimes Division of the Treasury. I've had hundreds upon hundreds of small business owners and people looking to start small businesses saying that they don't want to. They want to close their business. They don't want to start because they don't want to deal with the asymmetrical risk of having their information exposed or the government coming after them for doing something wrong. So because the government is imposing this regulation, which, by the way, is still in flux, it's preventing these entrepreneurs from taking those risks and creating opportunity, which creates jobs, which creates more dollars in their community, which grows the economy, which is what we need to move ourselves forward. This is so obvious, but all they want to do is take away wealth, create barriers, redistribute it, and make it very, very challenging for a small business owner to succeed.
You, I think it was you, Carol, said, maybe 6 months ago, we were talking and you said, Glenn, most of the stuff that they've done doesn't really kick in until 2025. So we haven't felt the full impact of Bidenomics yet. Was that you that said that to me?
Quite probably.
Okay.
Quite probably.
So what is it that is coming still that we haven't felt? Describe next year just as it stands, without any new policies, if we just continued where we are?
Well, as I said, the House Small Business Committee is doing a markup on 7 different pieces of legislation trying to overturn all of these stringent rules for small business. This Corporate Transparency Act, we have till the end of the year for that to go into effect. If there's no delay, which, by the way, there's 2 delay bills and 2 repeal bills and 7 lawsuits. If we don't get that done by the end of the year, then people are going to be faced with compliance. And then on top of that, we have the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, large pieces of that is expiring and changing the way that small businesses have to look at their taxes and figure out, what makes sense from them from an administrative standpoint. So, and that's, again, just scratching the surface. So, one after another, there are things in the pipeline. And then if Kamala Harris were to become president, again, day one, they are going to try to rule by executive order. I mean, one of the other things, this Department of Labor rule, their anti-independent contract rule, that went into effect in March. They haven't been truly enforcing it. I haven't seen much of the way of enforcement. But if they start to crack down on that, that's something that could kill, all of small business across the board. So there are just so many different things, and it's challenging enough to own your own business, as you well know, as a small business owner, to not constantly have to be worried about what's the next shoe that's going to drop coming from your own government.
Carol, one last question. I'm going to take a 1-minute break, and then I'd like you to come back and talk about, they're talking about a 50 basis point drop in the interest rate for loans. Some people say that's really good. Some people say that could collapse everything. Can you explain if that's a good thing or a bad thing at this point?
Well, so I have always contended that the Fed didn't have the right tools to address inflation, that inflation was coming from supply constraints, not demand, that the Fed really focuses on demand, and after 15 years of zero interest rate policy, that it wasn't really them that changed much of what was going on in terms of demand for new loans, et cetera. But they have taken up the interest rate very high, and a lot of people in the market, a lot of investors feel like they are behind the curve in terms of normalizing policy because they don't want to keep it so restrictive that they cause a recession. That's been the concern all along. So now that inflation has come down on a headline number, and we know cumulatively it's up over 20%, and that's what Americans are contending with. But from a policy standpoint, they see that inflation is coming down, and they see that the labor market isn't quite as robust as they had hoped. And so they're trying to address policy to quash any recessionary outcomes. That's really what they're trying to do. So they have a couple choices, right? They could do nothing, as they have done for a while.
We have about a minute.
They could deliver a cut, and now they're deciding between 0.5% and 0.25%. 0.5% may be bad news for them because it may give the market a signal that things are worse off than they are. So I think that they're going to be a little bit more cautious and go for that 25 basis point or 0.25% cut.
All right. So you don't think that it will, unless it's 50 basis points, you don't think that it will be a bad thing other than signaling that things might be worse than they thought?
Right, and it's a much bigger signal at 50 than it is at 25, given where we stand with all the data. But I know you've got limited time. We could get more into that another day.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that anybody will want to open up the purse strings at this point. I think everybody is waiting to see what's going to happen, with the presidential election. I mean, because we're going one way or the other, and they're in opposite directions. So it's kind of a scary place to be as an investor or a small business person or just, a regular worker in America today. Carol, thank you so much. Carol Roth.